Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to speak at this school. Your headmistress I've known for a number of years, is a serious scholar herself, and I know that this community cares a lot about the liberal arts and classical education. And this book is designed to be a kind of display speech of beautiful art and poetry that has a particular point, but also a kind of general walk through, a kind of Madame Tussauds wax museum of the liberal arts. So what I want to do tonight is sort of explain to you a little about how self-government, right, one of the things that this school, and I think any good school that calls itself a classical school or a liberal arts school wants to do, is to help train up good citizens. Because a good citizen really needs to have the full panoply of virtues. And how you go about doing that is actually, there's a whole tradition, and the liberal arts tradition is what that is. And I think it's good to start by translating the liberal arts a little differently. It comes from the old Ciceronian, tradition of the artes liberalis, or the good letters. But we say liberal arts, but it's always good to translate something a little differently, sort of turn it on its head to give you a fresh flavor. And I like to call it the arts of liberty, what it means to be free. And it turns out to be free is something that requires quite a bit of art, a lot of artful thinking, and a lot of artistic endeavor. And I don't just mean like we need more people to be painters or poets. What I mean is that we need each and every one of our citizens, and especially our leading citizens, to have that kind of artful judgment about what to do next, i.e. prudence, which governs all the other virtues. So that's like, hi, from the mountain comes Zeus with his lightning bolts of philosophical blah, 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 right? That's the background of this book, and so I mean it. But what I want to do is walk through a little of what one aspect of the liberal arts can give you, and that's particularly the ars poetica, the poetic arts, and in a certain sense, the ars rhetorica, the rhetorical arts. And the two are sort of blended together and not easily extracted from one another. So I want to talk about those and how they're related to self-government. Now, when I say self-government, I really do mean self-government, right? From time immemorial, Plato's Republic, right? It was about the city-soul analogy, that the soul and how it's governed is going to be reflected in the city, and vice versa. How the city is arranged will have powerful influence over the soul, right? So self-government is a kind of, double meaning. It means literally governing the inside of yourself, right? Governing your soul and mind and body, your heart, your passions, right? What you think and do, but also how to govern, right, as a free people here in this democratic republic, the United States. So, tall order. Now let's talk about a bunch of ridiculous and fuzzy mammals, right? Right. That's the strange thing about this project. So now I'm going to sort of take my philosopher, serious guy hat off and try to put on the ridiculous guy who has a bunch of fuzzy mammals to show you. But before I do, one last entree. Why this mouthful, Mr. Mehan's mildly amusing mythical mammal? I've been on television a few times, and this newscaster, especially the guy in Cincinnati, was hysterical. He's looking at the teleprompter. He's like, I'm here with Dr. Mehan and his new book. And he almost sort of shot me a look like, I'm going to kill you. Like, so bravo, that you got it. But there have been a number of like, oh, no. In fact, I was at a Barnes & Noble bookstore, and each time they announced it every 15 minutes, like, there's an author here. They slaughtered it in some new way. Mr. Mehan's mystical mammalian, whatever. But I nevertheless, I knew that it's a little crazy, and I had multiple editors say, don't do that, it's mad, people will hate you for it. It's like, you know what? There's something about the tradition that likes things a little woolly, a little personal, a little off kilter, right? Especially our tradition, the American, the Anglo tradition of culture, law, and language. We don't Like Versailles, shave our orange trees and lime trees into cubes, right? We'd like it a little woollier and a little more of a personal touch, a little more freewheeling. So I wanted my name in it, right? But let me just go through this title. Mr. It's a formal title. So formality, there's actually formal poetry in here, learning how to use the forms of poetry. Mehan, I wanted it to be an act of friendship because I think actually at the end of the day, you could reduce much of what the liberal arts are and the ars poetica and the ars rhetorica under a different heading, which is the art of friendship, which if the more you think about it as an artist, as an art form, the more likely you are to be a great friend, right? And that's an incredibly important bond for a free society and for your own human happiness. See the latter part of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. So I wanted it to be an act of friendship because the friendship between this guy, the Dally, and his friend the Blug is actually fundamental to the work. Mildly, poetry and rhetoric actually teach you how to be peaceful, how to speak mild words, how to calm passions, how to gain people's consensus about what to do next, right? Harsh words, sometimes there's a place for them, but what's harder to do often, and I think anyone who's experienced a Twitter mob might agree with this, it's what's harder to do is actually to calm passions, to speak peacefully words that bring about justice, right? Rather than to excoriate and destroy one's opponent. That is to say, there are arts of war, but there are also arts of peace. And poetry is fundamentally about those arts of peace. How do you move people through images and well-chosen words, right? How do you do that without using force and compulsion? That is to say, tyranny. How do you treat people freely with dignity and move them along in truth? Part of it is you got to know the truth. You need philosophy. But you also might need to know how to make that philosophy move people, right, in the right direction. Right? How to actually speak to their, not just their minds, but their hearts. Even their bodies, with a little bit of rhythm. Amusing, right? Poetry should be fun, humorous, goofy, lightsome, relieve the burdens of life in a certain sense. So, but it's also a double pun on the muse, inspiration, right? You have to be properly inspired by the right sources, both divine, but also human. You got to go drink from the well of good poetry, good philosophy, good arts, right? And so there's an emphasis on that, and it's actually in the middle of the whole title. Mythical. Myth is the way we talk about complex truths imagistically for easy understanding, right? And even when something is not easily rendered by argument, there's even truths that can be brought to our hearts and minds through image that don't really allow for a very clear discourse. Or if you do offer a discourse, it almost obscures the fact that this is something transcendently mysterious. The good, the true, and the beautiful, oftentimes in Plato's dialogues, had to be represented in the end, not just by argument, but by imagistic myth. But let me give you a picture of what I'm talking about. So truth oftentimes comes to us in myth, right? It's a fundamental part of how we come to know the causes of things, and even the causes of internal things. Aesop's fables are essentially myths about the morals and the passions that run within us. Right? And if you don't figure out how to use myth, you probably won't actually be able to talk about immaterial things like ideas, passions, causes, right? The mind and the soul. And then mammals. It's really important to remember that we're mammals. That sounds so stupid, and it sounds stupid every time I say it, but it's actually incredibly important. We're a rational animal, but more than that, what kind of animal? We're not a sponge in the ocean, right? That's an animal. We're a mammal. What are mammals known for? The fairer sex among us actually turn their blood into milk, sacrificially to feed our young. And we're not known for our grace and power, even though we have it, right? We're the strongest and the fastest of all the animals. But what we're best known for, because there's grace in birds and there's power in fish, right? We're known for our affection. We're known for a hug. We're known for a nuzzling set of little otters on some nature video, right? Go type in kitten emergency on the internet and look at what mammals are about, right? There's actually something really important about not forgetting the body, because it's what you are. And if you ignore it, you can commit all kinds of atrocities, right? Ignorance of what we are as fleshed, embodied creatures, right, can be extremely dangerous, right? And part of mental health, part of governing your own spirits, is recognizing the hilarious, laughable limitations of your mammalian self, right? I'm very upset. So Nietzsche might write his third autobiography about his blue period, right? But a sensible person, right, might actually go well, maybe I'm hungry, right? Because I'm a mammal, right? So there's actually a kind of a very practical and down-to-earth thing. I think it actually transcends that too. It's actually a way into learning a little bit more about our soul as well. But that's kind of a longer discussion. But and especially in an era where people think the body is essentially a collection of Legos that can be pulled apart and reconfigured any which way. It's really important to remember the autopilot setting, which is you are a mammal, right? And that's very, very good. So that's the title, just the title. There's a lot of words besides those. Let me just walk through what I tried to do with the first 3 poems. Each poem has an alphabet block, so a letter block for little kids that they can trace their fingers on, and it usually depicts the mammal more clearly than the painting often. And it also has a bunch of alliterative puns. So the ango in the letter block is actually awkwardly aiming another archer's arrow at an auburn apple. And that's just some of the A's. So that's for the little kids. They can see the letter, and then if they know the letter, they can play some alliterative games. The poem itself is a little more aimed at middle graders and above. And then the painting and the poem's wider and deeper themes, right, are for adults and teenagers. So I tried to write a family book that the entire family can engage all at once and separately. But let me not stand behind a podium while I show you a painting. And let me just recite the first poem and tell you a little about why the first 3 poems are a kind of introduction to the ABCs of the poetic arts. So this is the poem's called What's an Ango? Now, if I mess up, somebody grab a book and prompt me, but hopefully I get it. What's an ango? The ango has but little fame because folks hate its proper name. Ango grobugungculunctus has a ring that most find unctuous. And worse, the ango has a look that fits the awful name it took. Ango grobugungculunctus is only loved by utter dunces who love to use long Latin words when pointing out the plainest birds. Corvus brachyrhynchus and Cardinalis cardinalis are what ango lovers like to call the common crow and cardinal. So when your Latin troubles you and you forget just where your tongue is, thank God for words of common use, like ango for ango grobugungculunctus. It's a silly little beast fable about a silly little mammal, right? But there's a lot more going on there. It's important to know the uses of poetry, and they're very important for helping you communicate the truth both to yourself and to others. That sometimes putting things more simply in common tones, in common and easy to understand ways, is better than getting all of the truth out all at once. What is this creature? It's an ango grobugungculunctus, right? How about ango for starts, right? Let's get something on the board that everyone can understand and agree to. What is this? It's a cardinal, not a cardinalis cardinalis. It's good to have technical knowledge. It's good to have philosophical and scientific knowledge. But if you think that that is going to win the day all the time or move people initially towards the truth, I think you're in the wrong field, right? You're not going to be a good communicator. You're not going to bring people along in a prudent way, right? You have to start where people are and move from common opinion to truth. In one sense, this is a sort of ridiculous version of the age-old debate between the philosophers and the poets, right? I'm going to give this to you imagistically, intermingled, right? I'm going to give you the straight dirt. Just give it to you with the fire hose of truth. And I flipped it. This guy's the poet, right? He's saying, please, there might be another way, an indirect way. And this guy's, no, you're going to learn the whole thing right now. Right? Poetry appeals to the five senses. Right? And that's important to remember, that not just an appeal to the mind, because we're mammals, because we have bodies, right? So rhythm, song, beauty, image, the five senses. And they're represented here. Sight, hearing. He's got a big fat ear horn. This guy's got a huge schnoz, right? Smell, his tongue's out. Taste and touch. Yes, he's actually reading Braille, and the Braille says ango. Right? The appeal to the five senses. That's one thing that the visual arts and poetic arts can do, through rhythm, structure, even the sound rattling off your eardrum, the oral nature of poetry, right? And if you think that doesn't have civic repercussions, go do a poetic scan of some of Abraham Lincoln's finest speeches and listen for his intermittent use of real rhythm, which the man memorized a ton of Shakespeare. Right? So that's a sort of, there's a lot more I could say. I tried to sew in lots of depth, but that's a basic, one of the things that poetry does, is it teaches that kind of prudence, how to keep things simple, but also how to appeal to the whole of someone and move them along in stages. This is the blug. He's a big, fat, yellow ball. Right? Looks like a little piece of sunshine, right? He's sort of part hippo, part blowfish. But let me just read or recite the poem, The Blug. Bumbling by as slow as the slug is the tubbiest creature known as the blug. The blug plods a humorous pace, so slow in fact that he came in third place against the tortoise and the hare, who at the finish line stood and stared at this blobular, jolly, gelatinous jug as across the sky his body he lugged. On the tiniest wings that the world's yet seen, they're both the size of a kidney bean. Why, the blug's quite a slug, but he seems not to care, as he happily chugs through the cumbersome air. Simple little beast poem. And again, a kid can just enjoy the letter B and some alliteration, see some rhyme, see some meter, right? Remind them of Aesop's fables and the tortoise and the hare, a little joy of recognition about the tradition. The littles will get something out of it. But ideally, right, if it's taught or if it's reflected upon, hopefully this is actually an image about what poetry is in toto, right? So let me just, the letter B creature, let me just tell you a little about the symbolism of the painting. Right? Poetry does something kind of amazing. It takes very heavy matter, like a big fat blug, and makes it incredibly lightsome and winsome. Whimsy, delight, play, even tragedy, which puts something at a distance from you and you get to watch it on stage rather than live it out, right? It's sort of like a holodeck version of something you could screw up in your own life, right? You get to test it out and see, oh yeah, that's bad, I don't want that, right? It's great. But much of it is this lightsome way of communicating really serious truths. An Aesop's fable about a stork and some frogs could be about God and the punishments of justice, right? But it's a bunch of weird little animals hopping around in a pond, right? That's some heavy-duty stuff put in this silly and goofy way. So that's one thing poetry can do, is handle very serious matter in a very light way that you can engage, right? Horace says in the Ars Poetica that all good poetry must both delight and instruct. So it has to be delightful. It has to have a kind of ease and whimsy. And that's the blug. He rises up above, in some sense, mere moralia. It's not just a lesson. There's something else at play. And in a certain sense, poetry even has access to the transcendent. And if you look back here, this is actually the skyline of Christ's Church College, Oxford. You did. Bravo. It's one of the primordial sort of Lazarus pits of Anglophone culture. Poetry, philosophy, law, right? It's also where Lewis Carroll taught, right? So Christ Church College is a kind of it does triple duty for me in this painting, because he's coming from there. That is to say, as again Horace in the Ars Poetica says, the font of all good poetry must be wisdom, capital W wisdom, right? So here, Christ's Church, erudition, right, the transcendent. and it's making its way slowly to an end. I saw you've got Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics on the wall in big letters here at the school, bravo. But, so you might know the word telos, the Greek word for an end, a purpose. Poetry has a purpose. It should come from wisdom, but it should have a purpose. And it takes its slow time, bumbling by as slow as a slug, right through the cumbersome air. It's not in a hurry. It's not get it right now. It's leisurely. We need to rest sometimes. Animals get tired and sleepy and weepy, and we need something delightful. And so let's take a somewhat circumlocucious route to the truth. Right? Emily Dickinson, tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies. Right? But it has a purpose. And we have Peter Teniel's White Rabbit. Peter Teniel is the original illustrator for Alice in Wonderland Through the Looking Glass. He was a friend of Lewis Carroll's. And this is a direct visual quote of the White Rabbit. No time to say hello, goodbye. I'm late. I'm late, I'm late, I'm late. Busy, busy, busy. Mr. Business. Poetry, right, takes its time. It's leisurely. Otium versus negotium. Leisure versus business. Right? Business is good, business is important, but you need to be able to ennoble your rest time. And that's something that good poetry can do. Right? Oftentimes, we're very serious in our business, and then we and sort of static into trash. Right? What if we rested with nobility and beauty and truth, but done in a light and meandering way? Like it's sort of, that's the ennobling side of the ars poetica. Right? It's very important. So that's something to do with that one, the blug. Let me give you one more. And then I'll just briefly account the wider theme of the book. Because this is just sort of the ABC's introduction, a kind of mega nerd liberal arts warm-up. This is the Colveno. He's not depicted. If you look in the book, he's a sort of strange, dragony, gremlin-y looking, he actually has like a Thanos chin, but it was before I never thought about Thanos, but he has the same ribbed chin as Thanos, so, I guess great minds think alike. No, I don't. So the Colveno, he's actually hidden right here in this cave. The Colveno eats rocks deep down in the earth. He's a creature of some considerable girth, thick fat legs and claws like the mole for digging his den and his surfacing hole. The entrance is wide like an elephant's rear and smells just as foul if you dare to draw near. The Colveno's quite picky, turning some rocks away. That one's too icky, this one's too gray. And oh, by the way, the Colveno belches fire. So meeting one's not something one should desire. Yes, beware the Colveno as his rocks he slurps, and run for your lives if ever he burps. Silly, stupid, delightful beast poem, right? Not much there, right? Did you all get the joke, the basic joke? The Colveno sounds like volcano. Yeah. It was interesting. I had 40 kids in a room yesterday, and they all were like, volcano, immediately. It's like, oh, I thought I was being a little trickier than that. A volcano. If you notice, this painting's a little moody. The other two are kind of crisp and bright, right, and clear. This one is hazy, dark even. Sun's going down. It's based on an impressionist painting called Mount Helicon, which is the birthplace of the Muses, right, where Hesiod was shepherd and was given the inspiration of the Muses. The problem is, the Muses tell Hesiod, right, we tell lies, but we know when to tell truth when we wish, right? Oops, right? That's the great problem with poetry, is beauty can be deceptive. Some poets are bad poets who actually want to move you away from the truth or don't know what they're doing and are so chaotic that they wind up accidentally moving you away from good things simply out of ignorance and bumbling, lack of craft, and earnest desire for good. So I wanted to get at that, the volcano, and I said to the students yesterday, I said, so, obviously, does a volcano come from a Colveno burping fire and rocks? Yes. No, it doesn't, right? This is the whole point, right? It's not that, right? That's the danger, right? Is you can be misled by false causes. Myths can be false myths, that are not true, or that are only true in one sense. And you have to have what Chaucer called a good mother wit to see this is dangerous, but it's actually good in this way. But it's not good for this, right? So there's this problematic side. And if you don't learn how to deal with images wittily, if you don't see when you're being manipulated or moved, which poetry's supposed to do, but moved in the wrong way, you are going to be an innocent little sheep who might just be lured into a very dangerous, fiery den, right? There's a line in the Gospel of Matthew, right? Matthew 10:16, be ye wise as serpents, innocent as doves, right? In the tradition, right, in the Western tradition, those serpents have been interpreted to mean poetry and philosophy, the arts of philosophy, logic, right, thinking clearly, metaphysics, morals, and rhetoric and poetry, right? That you actually need those skills, right, so that you can protect like what is good, true, innocent, and worth protecting, the dove, right? It's a very important part of training up the next generation, is that they can tell a hawk from a handsaw. They can tell a tyrant from a leader. They can tell a good law from a bad one, right? It's actually being able to turn things around in your head and see, like, that's deceptive. This has these downsides. That's a lie, right? That's a bad way to put it. You're speaking poorly. This speech isn't a good representation of a good soul. It's a kind of mythical representation of a bad soul, or at least a bad display from a bad day of a good soul, right? Like, i.e., sit this one out. You're not my candidate. I won't vote for you, right? It's actually really important to be able to see images which are put forward all the time. Now we call them memes, right? There's all kinds of images we're bombarded with, and be able to see whether they're good or bad, and see the intermingling of light and darkness, because oftentimes they're not all bad. They're not an evil image. They're just kind of messed up, but there's something good in them, and we need to have that loving, friendly, patient with our neighbor, our fellow citizen, with our friends, with our family, to say, that's good in this way, but let's talk some more about some other things that maybe we could improve. Like, let's maybe here read this, or let's talk about that, or let me give you a counter image, right? So the ars poetica and the ars rhetorica, and thinking about these things cleverly, shaping that wit, that good mother wit, which oftentimes, by the way, in our tradition of self-government has been called Republican wit, a good sense of humor that can see something and turn it in a bunch of different ways, right? And laugh in the face of difficulty as well, because it's hard to live liberty. It's actually difficult and requires a kind of stern stuff, but not just a stoic sternness, the ability to live together with other people and not be harsh with them. So the ability to soften difficult things with laughter and humor and lightsome, heavy things put lightly, right? Living the burdens of our communal and shared life in a serious way. That's what poetry and good rhetoric can do. And it can also do one other thing, and let me just transition quickly into sort of the wider theme of the book. And then I think, and then I guess we can switch to take some questions. And I can maybe read some more poems if you want. It's up to you. This is the Dally, the letter D creature. He's our sort of everyman. He's got his neckties, like sort of Joe Average, headed to work. Faithful dog face, but kind of monkey gibbon body, something a little more simian, a little closer to us. But let me read his poem, one of the simplest poems in the whole collection. The Dally. Among the pelting drops of rain, the Dally can be seen again. The rocks, the trees, they know him well, but where he'll show no one can tell. For though the forests soaked and sopped, the Dally skirts each drop that's plopped. But if you are one keen of eye who sits and stoops in storms, you'll spy the dodgy Dally dancing dry. Again, simple little poem, little rhyme, little alliteration for the letter D, shout out there at the end, right? Blue and yellow neckties, right coming out of his brain, sunshine and cloud, light and dark, happiness and sadness, right? He's a little bit of a troubled fellow. What does it mean to dally? We talk about a dalliance. It usually means you took some time with something that was probably a bad call for you and somebody else, right? Right? To dally is to take too long in something that you should have moved on to other work, to other duties, to other parts of your life, right? To dally. It can also mean just to rest and have fun. So it's kind of got a good side and a bad side, right? It's interesting to note that in the moral tradition of moral philosophy, arts and letters, right, dallying is the thing that starts you down the road to the vice of sadness. By wasting time, by being slothful, right, rather than properly active and properly contemplative, right, you actually can invite the door to sadness and despair, failure. Right? The dally knows how to dodge the rain. So he doesn't suffer, he doesn't get wet. He knows how to dodge every problem, right? But in the very next poem, he meets the evil, the letter E creature, right? And he tells him the saddest tale about the whole world and argues that fundamentally the entire cosmos is tragic, right? You see the stars? Behind them are black spaces of night, right, that say, I love not you, right? Rather than charity being the formational reality behind the entire cosmos, the way Cicero argues, or the Christian tradition argues, right? He says, no, death, nothingness. The dally sits and listens to this weepy tale and gets rained on and cried on by the evil. And the rest of the book is him taking a tour through a bunch of mythical mammals, most of it very light bestiary, some of it a much higher register. I take a few liberties with young readers and go, let's just go way up into the clouds with a very complex poem. But in general, tetrameter, light verse, but symbolically laced throughout and then hinted at in a glossary that you can actually use to unpack, if you wish, a little more deeply the meanings in the poems, is a journey learning friendship with the blug, but learning what the Western tradition, what the liberal arts and the ars poetica can teach you about how to govern your passions and how to govern your heart towards what in the moral philosophical tradition is the cure for sadness. And by the way, I've been teaching for a long time, and I've watched sadness be a growing problem in the digital age of comfort and so-called social media. And so I took this very seriously as my theme for this book, because it's good to think about what the antidotes to anxiety, loneliness, and sadness are. One of them is the art of friendship. It's fundamental that your sons and daughters learn how to have good friendships. That means they have to learn how to communicate very finely, right? Very justly and very nobly with other people. And very humorously and lightly and entertainingly and delightfully, because you have to attract friends. They have to want to be with you, right? But it's also you have to foster the discipline of your tongue for what not only you tell other people, but what you tell yourself. The dally encounters a number of creatures. One of them is the nole. It's this beautiful creature, a winged creature meant to fly, that can't get out of the pool of tears, her own tears. And she reaches up and gropes around for help occasionally, but every time she does, she starts to sing a song that is about how she failed, how she took too much time with the wrong kinds of things and indulged in the sweetness happenstantial, in the pleasures so unnatural. She just forgot herself, but not only did she fall, she cannot now stop monologuing like a bad guy in a Brad Bird Incredibles movie, right? You caught me monologuing, you sly dog, right? You don't know what to tell yourself to get out of trouble, right? Part of it is what your friends tell you, but then you have to gloss what they tell you. And we always are speaking to ourselves. And if you don't attend to the artful speech that you speak to yourself, you'll be blinded like the blind ape, the evil, who tells himself a story about everything around him that's false and blind and dark, right? And you'll actually trap yourself more deeply in sadness and sorrow, and you'll dig a deeper hole rather than begin to fill it in and step up back into the sunlight. And it's actually really important to learn how to do this. And it requires a certain artfulness. And by the end of the book, they actually meet the zeal ion, right? We can talk about that in the Q&A if you want, what that might mean. But zeal is, if you don't know, that's the actual antidote to sadness. You know, there's always a vice and a contrary virtue, right? So sadness, zeal, that's the contrary. Zeal is the cure. So thinking about that virtue and what that means is essentially one of the things I try to put forward and shoot through the entire poetic work. Now my wife is echoing in my back of my brain right now, don't get too serious. Don't be so serious, man. Why so serious? Right? This is a ridiculous set of poems, right? And there's satire, and I tell some ridiculous bad puns. There's all kinds of goofballery. So don't get me wrong. What I want to do is provide an antidote to sadness. So the book is lightsome, colorful, ridiculous, strange, funny, right? Because part of the thing that cures sadness on the way to zeal, right? If you're really going to have zeal, you first have to be able to laugh. And that's why wit isn't just about the things I mentioned before. It's also fundamentally a way to disarm evil, right? It's a tradition. Like, laugh at the devil. Can't stand it. Because pride can't stand being mocked, right? Laughter, right? Shared laughter is really important. And that's, at the end of the day, one of the great things poetry teaches. So that's the book in a sort of tiny nutshell of nerdery. Thank you for actually listening to it, and I'm happy to take questions.